Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daily English Podcast, the place where you don't just learn English, you start thinking in English. And I'm Michael, and together we're going to help you sound more fluent step by step.
Because here, we don't focus on perfect grammar. We focus on real communication, real conversations, and real confidence. Then you're in the right place. Because today, we're going to fix one of the biggest problems.
Translating in your head.
Yes, unfortunately, that habit that slows you down and makes you feel like you're not fluent, even when you know the words.
So let me ask you something. Do you translate every sentence in your head before you speak English?
Honestly, yes, I do that a lot. And it feels exhausting, like my brain is working twice every single time I try to speak.
Yeah, I totally get that. And let me ask you, when you do that, do you feel like you're a little slower than the conversation?
Oh, definitely. It's like I already know what I want to say, but I just can't say it fast enough. And that's really frustrating.
Exactly. That's the key problem. It's not that you don't know English, it's that your brain is taking too many steps.
Too many steps? What do you mean by that, Michael?
Well, think about it like this. First, you think in your own language. Then you translate it into English. And only after that, you actually speak.
Wow. Yeah, when you say it like that, it sounds like a lot of work.
Exactly. And all of that happens in just a few seconds. So, of course, it feels slow and stressful.
That makes so much sense. So the real problem is not my English level, right?
Yes. Let me ask you something important. Have you ever understood everything in a conversation but still felt like you couldn't join it?
Yes, all the time. I understand. I follow the conversation. But when it's my turn to speak, I hesitate.
Right. And that hesitation comes from translating, because your brain is busy building the perfect sentence.
Yeah, I always try to make it perfect. I think, is this correct? Is this the right tense?
Exactly. And while you're thinking about all that, the moment is already gone.
So, what should I do instead? I mean, I can't just stop thinking, right?
No, of course not. But you can change how you think.
Okay, I like that. So, where do we start?
Let me ask you this. When kids learn a language, do they translate?
No, they don't. They just think and speak at the same time.
Exactly. So the goal is simple. We need to train our brain to do the same thing.
That sounds good, but also a little scary, honestly.
Yeah, I understand that. But don't worry. We're going to break it down into simple steps.
All right, I'm ready. What's the first step?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that, because this is where everything starts to change. The first step is actually very simple, but at the same time, it's very powerful. You need to start thinking in words, not in full sentences.
Thinking in words sounds interesting, but I want to understand it better. Do you mean I should stop building full sentences completely, or just change how I start thinking?
That's a really good question. And I like how you said that. You don't need to stop using sentences when you speak, but you need to stop starting with full sentences in your mind. Instead, you begin with small, simple ideas, just a few key words.
Okay, that actually makes sense because when I think about it, long sentences feel heavy in my mind. But short words, simple ideas, they feel much faster and easier.
Exactly, and that's the whole point. Your brain prefers speed over perfection, especially in real conversations. So when you give your brain something simple, it reacts faster and more naturally.
So instead of trying to be correct, I should try to be quick and clear, right? Definitely clear communication, because if people understand me, that's enough. And honestly, most of the time, people don't even notice small mistakes.
Exactly. And that's something many learners don't realize. They think every sentence has to be perfect, but in real life, communication is much more relaxed. People care about meaning, not perfection.
That actually takes a lot of pressure off. So, how can someone practice thinking in words in daily life?
Great question. And this is where practice becomes very important. You can start with very simple situations. For example, when you are planning something in your day, instead of thinking a full sentence, you just think in key words.
Can you give me a real example? Something very simple that people can try today?
Of course. Let's say you're thinking about going to the gym after work. Normally, you might think, I'm going to the gym after work because I want to stay healthy. But instead of that, you just think work, gym, healthy.
I like that. It feels lighter and I don't feel stuck when I think like that. It's almost like my brain can move faster.
Exactly. And over time, your brain will automatically connect those words into natural sentences. You don't need to force it. It will happen naturally with practice.
So the goal is not to speak like a robot, but to train the brain first, right?
Yes, exactly. That's very important. At the beginning, you train your thinking, and then your speaking improves automatically. And this is something a lot of people skip. They focus only on speaking, but they ignore thinking.
That's really interesting because I never thought about thinking as a skill before. I always focused on grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation.
Yes, and those things are important, of course. But without the right thinking process, they don't help you speak fluently. Thinking is the foundation of speaking.
That actually changes how I see learning English. So, what comes after thinking in words? What's the next step?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you're thinking about the next step already, because this is where things start to feel more practical. After thinking in words, the next step is to keep your English simple when you speak.
Keeping it simple sounds easy, but I feel like this is where many people make mistakes. Why do we try to make our English more complicated than it needs to be?
That's very true, and it happens more often than people realize. Most learners think that using longer sentences and more advanced words will make them sound more fluent, but in reality, it often has the opposite effect.
Yeah, I've noticed that in myself too. Sometimes I try to build a perfect sentence, and then I stop in the middle because I'm not sure anymore.
Exactly. And that's the moment where fluency breaks. When your sentence becomes too complex, your brain slows down and you lose your natural rhythm. Let me ask you, when that happens, do you feel more confident or less confident?
Definitely less confident because I feel like I'm making a mistake or I'm not doing it correctly. And then I start thinking even more, which makes it worse.
Right, and that's a cycle that keeps repeating. You try to be perfect, you slow down, you lose confidence, and then you hesitate even more. So instead of doing that, we need to simplify everything.
So it's not about sounding advanced. It's about being clear and natural, right?
Yes, that's the key idea. Clear communication is always more important than complex sentences. Let me give you a simple example so it becomes very clear.
Yes, that would help a lot.
Instead of saying, I would like to purchase something, you can simply say, I want to buy this. It's shorter, easier, and much more natural in real conversations.
Yeah, that feels much better, and I don't have to think as much when I say it. It just comes out more easily.
Exactly. And that's what we want. We want your English to feel automatic, not forced. When you keep things simple, your brain works faster and your confidence grows naturally.
I like that. It feels more realistic and less stressful. So, after keeping things simple, what should we focus on next?
That's a great question, and this is where confidence starts to build naturally. Once you simplify your English, you begin to feel more comfortable speaking, and that comfort turns into confidence over time.
So, confidence doesn't come first. It comes after practice, right? Because I think many people are waiting to feel confident before they speak.
Yes, Lauren, and that's a very common mistake. People think, I will speak when I feel ready. But the truth is, you become ready by speaking. Confidence is not something you wait for, it's something you build.
That makes a lot of sense. Because when I actually try to speak, even if it's not perfect, I start to feel a little better each time.
Yes, exactly. That's progress. Every small attempt helps your brain adapt, and slowly, speaking becomes more natural and less stressful.
So it's like training a muscle, right? The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly, Lauren. That's a perfect comparison. And just like any muscle, consistency is more important than intensity. Small, daily practice is much better than trying to be perfect once in a while.
I like that idea. It feels more achievable. So people don't need to study for hours, they just need to practice regularly.
Yes, Lauren. And more importantly, they need to practice actively, not just passively. Speaking, even in simple ways, is what builds real confidence.
All right, so we're building confidence step by step. But I still feel like overthinking is a big problem. How do we stop thinking too much while speaking?
That's a very important point. And honestly, overthinking is one of the biggest obstacles to fluency. Let me ask you something. When you overthink, do you feel more fluent or less fluent? That's a very important point. And honestly, overthinking is one of the biggest obstacles to fluency. Let me ask you something. When you overthink, do you feel more fluent or less fluent? Exactly. Because overthinking interrupts your natural rhythm. Instead of focusing on communication, you focus on correctness, and that creates pressure.
So how do we break that habit?
You break it by shifting your focus. Instead of thinking, is this correct? You think, can they understand me? That small change makes a big difference.
That's interesting because it changes the goal completely. It's no longer about perfection, it's about connection.
Exactly. And communication is always about connection. When you focus on meaning, your brain relaxes and your speech becomes more natural.
So the less I think about rules, the better I speak?
In real conversations, yes. You already learned the rules. Now it's time to use them without thinking too much.
Okay, that makes sense, but I have another question. How can someone practice thinking in English every day, especially when they are alone?
That's a great question, and it's actually easier than people think. You don't need a partner, you just need awareness. Start describing your day in simple English, even in your mind.
Can you give an example of that?
Of course. For example, if you're making coffee, you can think, make coffee, hot water, drink. Very simple, but very effective.
That's actually very practical. So you're turning daily actions into English practice.
Exactly. And the more you do this, the more natural it becomes. At some point, you don't even notice it. Your brain starts thinking in English automatically.
I like that because it doesn't feel like studying. It feels like part of your daily life.
Yes, and that's the goal. When English becomes part of your daily routine, progress becomes much faster.
So once we start thinking in English daily, how do we move from thinking to speaking more confidently?
That transition happens naturally, but you can support it with small actions. For example, you can speak out loud when you are alone, even simple sentences.
I think some people feel a bit uncomfortable doing that. Talking to themselves feels strange at first.
That's true, but it's very effective. And remember, no one is judging you. This is your practice time. Speaking out loud helps your brain and your mouth work together.
So it's like connecting thinking and speaking in real time.
Exactly. And that connection is the key to fluency. The more you practice it, the faster and smoother your speech becomes.
I like that. It feels like a complete process now. First thinking, then simplifying, then speaking.
Yes, Lauren, exactly. And when you combine all of these steps, you create a natural and effective way to become fluent.
So if you look at everything we talked about today, you can see that the real problem is not your English level. It's the way you think when you try to speak.
Yes, exactly. And once you change your thinking process, everything starts to feel easier, faster, and much more natural.
You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need perfect sentences. You just need to express your ideas clearly and keep going.
Yes, and remember, fluency is not about being perfect, it's about being comfortable, confident, and consistent.
So start small, think in simple words, don't overcomplicate your sentences, and most importantly, just speak.
Because the more you speak, the more natural it becomes, and over time, you will notice that you are thinking in English without even trying.
And that's the moment when everything changes, when English stops being something you translate and becomes something you actually use.
Exactly. And that's what we want for you.
If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to improve your English every single day,
Make sure to subscribe to the Daily English Podcast because we're going to practice together, step by step,
we'll keep things simple, practical, and natural.
so you can finally speak English with confidence.
Thanks for being here with us.
And we'll see you in the next conversation.